everybody, welcome to another Thursday tip and tricks. Here's your hint. No, we're not making kite tails. No, we're not making a cat toy. Today I'm going to address the technique of chain piecing. Now, this is something that I've done habitually for the last 40 years, but you might be new to quilting, or maybe you've never really done chain piecing, and I'd like to take a few minutes today and talk about some of the things that I know that are truly beneficial about chain piecing. So we're going to address all those questions: the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and how to do chain piecing. So let's start right at the beginning. Who is going to benefit from chain piecing? Well, that's going to be our machine piecing quilters. If you are an applique artist, if you do English paper piecing, if you do paper foundation piecing, chain piecing isn't something that pertains to you very much or very often. Now, what is chain piecing? Basically, it's an assembly line stitching process that is going to streamline the construction of your quilts. Now, when do I use chain piecing? Me, I use it all the time, but I use it in the beginning when I'm putting the basic shapes together. I'll use it in the middle when I'm putting units together and putting them into blocks, and I'll use them when I'm building the blocks together into the full quilt. It is something that I use at every aspect of the quilting process. Now, where do I use chain piecing? Doesn't matter, wherever I am sewing. I'll use it in my studio, I use it in classrooms, I'll use it as a retreat, but it's something that I do all the time when I'm doing machine piecework. Now, why is chain piecing beneficial? Well, there are a number of reasons. One, it saves me time. And you know, that's one thing that I can never get more of in my life is time. So I try to use the most efficient methods, and this is it as far as I'm concerned. It saves me thread. Instead of building each piece individually, cutting them and taking them apart, I save all that for an assembly line process. It saves me energy. I don't have those long dangly threads that I have to clean up off my quilt when I'm all finished. It saves me headaches. Oftentimes when I'm putting pieces under a sewing machine, I end up with that nest of threads in the bobbin. Chain piecing virtually eliminates that. And it helps to keep me organized. If I plan correctly and I work through the plan with the chain piecing, I know I'm going to have pieces being built for correctness and for more efficiency. All right, so now that we talked about those questions, how do you chain piece? Let's talk about the steps that you should go through. First thing you should do is prepare your pieces. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to do some chain piecing here first on these simple little 4 patches. What you should do is plan your construction steps. I've already prepared the sections of the 2 squares put together, and I'm going to be chain piecing these together. And when I go to put them together, what I'm going to do is set them on the table in front of me. And when I pick up the unit and place it together, there are 2 options that I have. I can sew on either side of this and create that 4-patch unit. But there is one side that I know I prefer. When you go to put this together, I've pressed all the seams toward the blue squares. I know from years of experience, and this is a great tip for you to carry through to all your other piecework, I know that if I sew into the seam allowance, so the one I'm stitching, if I stitch on this side of my pair of squares, it's going to create a much sharper intersection at the center of my 4-patch. If I happen to rotate this around and be stitching on this side, where I'm stitching on the side where the seam allowance is pressed toward me, I tend to get a little gap in there. So my plan is to stitch into my seam, which means I'm going to have to position them like this, which is how I have them laid out on the table. And now I'm ready to do my stitching. All right, so I'm going to line those first 2 up, get ready to start my chain piecing. Step 1, I made my plan. Step 2 is to start with a scrap of fabric. It's just a little piece of fabric. I happen to put it right underneath my needle. I generally don't drop it that hard, but I start and do my stitching and move right to the end of that leader. Now, without picking that presser foot back up again, I'm going to take those position pairs of fabric that I plan to stitch together, and I'm going to slide them right up underneath the needle. At this point, I'm going to progress slowly. I'm going to pay attention to making sure that I have my good 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to adjust the pieces as I need to, and possibly use a tool such as a seam ripper or an awl to hold it into place as I'm going through. Now, when I get close to the end of the first pair, I'm going to repeat what I just did. Pick up my planned pairing, line them up, get them so that the seams are going to nest, come to the end of my first pair, put these up underneath, and let the machine just do the work of pulling that pair through, doing a small adjustment. I can sew quickly once I'm on my fabric, but when I get to the end, that's when I want to slow down and stop when I'm right at the end. Now realize you don't have to butt the upcoming pair up against the pair that's underneath. There's going to be a few threads that will chain in between one to the next. So you can sew as fast as you want as long as you're on the fabric and, let me get that nestled there, on the fabric. But when you're coming near the end, that's when you want to slow down the process. And when you get to the end, don't lift up that presser foot and tear that piece out from underneath. What I want you to do is come back, remove that scrap of fabric that we used as the leader, and position it underneath. It's now an ender, and it's also a leader for when I go to stitch my next grouping of chain piecing. So leaders and enders are important parts of this. When I've got my chain completed and I've done all my 4 patches, I'd head to the iron and I would be snipping these pieces apart and pressing them so that I spin my seams. And if you've tuned into some of our earlier tips and tricks, we address that. But sometimes I don't snip the pieces apart right away. One of the things that I do when I have to stitch 2 lines on either side, some of you may recognize this. These are the shapes that I use when I'm doing my fast flying geese. And I've got 2 lines of stitching that I need to address. I've already stitched these together, one behind the next, but rather than snipping them apart and then picking them up again one at a time as an individual piece, I'm leaving the chain together so that then I can come back, and of course my leader is already there, ready to go, and I can come back and place those stitches on there. And I can place those stitches on the line, slowing down when I go from piece to piece, speeding up as I stitch on the line. I need to flip that one over. Slow down as I go in between. Speed up as I get to the end. And at the end of this one, I'm going to show you another trick. Instead of using a scrap of fabric, one of the things that I'll often do is I'll have a plate full of pieces that I plan to sew together for a future project. And I'll use those pieces, those pairs of fabric, as my leader and my ender. Take my time, get it started, sew, and then I'm going to stop. And if I were sewing and this were the end of the day, I'm going to leave that piece right underneath there. It'll be ready for me to start my next grouping of sewing, but it also has the benefit of keeping any dust from falling into that bobbin case area. So if you've never tried it, you should. And if you don't use it, you should. It's good for every level of quilter, whether you happen to be a rookie, whether you happen to be a veteran. And I hope that you at least give it a valiant effort and a valiant try to make some more efficient quilts, because I know if you're like me, there's lots of them on our bucket list. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. I hope to see you all next Thursday.